Welcome to the Mindset Mile podcast, the show that'll leave you empowered to take action towards becoming the turned up version of your already awesome self. I'm your host, Aisha Zaza, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's go. Hey friend, welcome back to another episode of the Mindset Mile podcast. I'm so excited for today's conversation because I am with my friend, Jenny, the nutritionist. She was my very first interview on the podcast. And that episode, I need to go back, Jenny, and check the downloads on that episode, but it was off the Richter scale because everybody was like so into the information that you share. And I'm really happy to have you back on, especially now because I have stepped into I should say, my macros journey at the start of this year. And I've been sharing about it more naturally on social media. So I've been getting all these questions and I've been answering them to the best of my ability, but the people really do want to hear from you. So Jenny, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us what you do and who you are.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me again. So I am Jenny, or Jenny the nutritionist, and I am a nutrition coach for ladies who lift weights and want to look like they lift weights, who want to build muscle, decrease body fat, and really understand nutrition and learn how their body works and create their nutrition routine so it all runs on autopilot. So that's what I do and who I work with.
I love it. Okay. And I want to just dive right in. And I actually, when we were together a couple weeks ago, I should actually give the people a little bit of a backstory. Jenny's in Bali. So it's 4:00 here in California. And for Jenny, it is 8:00 tomorrow morning. So for one, I think that's so cool that we are able to do this across the globe.
Yes.
But when we were together a couple weeks ago, when you were out in California, I had posted that we were going to be doing an episode soon. And I asked my audience if they had any specific questions. So I've got a mix of questions from my audience and just in general, what I feel like people are always asking me. And I'm sure they're asking you. So I want to just start with Macros 101. Like, let's give a really quick introduction for the person that's listening to this, that's absolutely sick of hearing the word macros without understanding what that actually means. So, what are macros and how does one figure out what their macro targets should be?
Yeah. So macros you've actually probably have heard about, but maybe you just haven't put the two and two together. So macros are what calories are made up of. So if you double click down on calories, food breaks down into these categories of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So those are the three macro sources. So protein, you might think of meats and fish. Those are great sources of protein. For carbohydrates, you might think of rice and potatoes. And then for fats, you might think of olive oil or mixed nuts. So macros are really a type of food. And then most food has a primary source of macros, like steak, for example, is mainly going to be a protein. But there is overlap. So steak will also have some fat in it. So it's not just one food, it's just one macro. There's typically an overlap to some degree. And they are, I feel like, the most effective and efficient way to change your body composition. So, to change your body composition, to build muscle or decrease body fat or to fuel yourself, it really comes down to the quantity of food or calories. And while, yes, the quality of food is also important, the main driver is going to be the amount of food. So I could say, hey, fuel yourself in, you really need 2,000 calories. Well, you could have that in Skittles, right? And you could get that whole entire 2,000 calories from Skittles, but that's probably not going to be very effective. So if we say, hey, yes, it's 2,000 calories, but of that 2,000 calories, you want X percent from protein, X percent from carbs, and X percent from fat, then we can start being a little bit more specific and a little bit more fine-tuned to you and what your body needs. So I think that macros are a great option for when you get to a point where you feel like your relationship with food is good and solid, where you have maybe less than 40 pounds to lose and you're more so focused on body composition, where you're fine tuning your shape and building muscle and kind of taking your shape to that next level. I think everyone says, oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. I think putting it into context of who it's best for and when on the journey is really helpful. So that is macros. And then how would you figure out your own target? So this is where it gets a little more complicated, but I'm going to give you the high level answer. So there are formulas and it's an art and it's a science. There's a lot of things to capture that would determine your specific macros. So there are online calculators that will tell you and spit out some macros for you. So you could play around with that, but I do advise I'd be hesitant because, first of all, computers can only collect so much information. And so they're only collecting a little bit of information. And then, as we'll talk about, there's a strategy to using macros and there's a strategy to building your shape. And so it really, again, this is the art part where you want to know that person's story. You want to know what they were eating before, what their goals are. You want to map it out over time. And so an online calculator is just going to spit out one piece of information. And typically, from my experience, they're just going to cut calories and cut calories and cut your carbs and cut food, which may not be the best. So what I really advise is, especially if it's your first time dabbling in macros, is working with a coach, because they're going to know the strategy. They're going to know the formulas. They're going to be able to hear about your story and just dive in to the art side of it too, in addition to the science. Now, I know people are like, okay, but just give me something right now. So I can give some ranges if you think that would be
I
helpful.
do. I think that would be helpful because as much as I think people like the idea of working with a coach, I feel like they need to know a little bit more in order to understand what it means then to work with a coach.
Yeah. And a lot of people want to dabble at first
Yeah.
too. I know I did. They're like, okay, let me just download the app and let me just try and
Yeah.
see some what I'm eating and what maybe I should shoot for. And I think that's a great place to start. And so the ranges I'm going to give are going to be specific for someone who is working out. And because yes, macros for everyone are going to be very custom and specific to that person. However, generally, if you are a female who has, like I said, is focused on like changing your body composition and who is working out consistently, these are the general ranges that I typically would see. So for your protein, generally going to be around body weight. So that would be, again, individual to the person. For carbs, this is where it may range a little. I really see anywhere from 150 grams to 300 grams of carbs. I know that is a big range, but let's just say if you have a lot more muscle and a lot more activity, you would be on that higher end. Whereas if you're in the opposite boat, might be on that lower end. So 150 to 300 grams. And then for fat, typical range may be 65 to 85 grams of fat, maybe a bit lower depending on where we're at in the strategy, but those are good ranges to kind of guesstimate.
Okay. I think that's really helpful. And just for, again, for someone that's like, I've never even looked at a macro calculator, what that includes is it's going off of your body's information, right? So it's height, age, weight, activity level, right? And then your goal. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, they different calculators will have different things, but yeah, they normally take like 4 or 5 pieces of information, which,
Okay.
isn't, but it's better than nothing, but it's missing a lot more information to really, I think, be more accurate and again, tie it to strategy.
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. Thank you for explaining that. I want to give a really clear picture for someone that's like, I don't understand where these numbers are coming from and how she's getting them. It is based on
Yes.
your body, your age, your very specific composition. So I know that everybody has different goals, but the majority of people that I talk with, and I know everyone that you work with, is interested in learning how to drop pounds and or how to increase lean muscle and decrease their body fat, right? So
Hmm.
Educate us on why it's so important to go into a calorie deficit slowly and over the course of 8 to 12 weeks, which is like a typical cut, right?
Yeah. So I think it's important to first zoom out, and going back to that strategy. I say this all the time because it's the number one thing that I know I was missing. And when I was plateauing, when I was confused, when I was stuck, I'm like, why? I'm working out. Why do I look like I work out? I didn't know there was a strategy to building muscle and decreasing body fat. And the strategy really ties in with what macros you would be consuming at that time. So, just to give everyone, I think, to answer this question, but in a way that they also can understand it and really take it away, is to understand the nutrition strategy. So, you don't want to be in a calorie deficit all of the time. I think that's one thing that people think is like, oh my gosh, I just need to eat less and eat less and eat less. I need to eat 1,200 calories, zero carbs, and just decrease. And you also don't want to not consider these different goals that you have. So, for example, if you really are focused on strength training and building muscle, and you're in the gym and that's the phase that you're in, and you're trying to hit PRs, but you're also really in a calorie deficit and focus on decreasing your calories, it's going to be more difficult to build muscle if you don't have the nutrients to build muscle. So again, going back to the strategy. So I'm just going to quickly at a high level go over the strategy and then break it down into timing, because I think that will answer both questions. So the nutrition strategy has 3 steps. The first step is to eat enough. The second step is to align your training with your nutrition. And then the third step and last step is to enter into a calorie deficit. So the first step, eat enough. I know everyone's like, wait, what is enough? What does that mean?
Yes.
So going back to the calories of what you need. So what does that mean? It's how many calories are you burning per day? Most ladies who are working out or lifting weights consistently, even for an hour, 4 days a week, they are burning 2,000 calories per day or more, right? So people don't realize that, or that they could even consume that much. But the first step is to slowly and steadily work up to that amount. So I know people are thinking like, but why would I do that? Would I gain body fat? And the reason why you would want to do it is because, one, eating more increases your metabolism. Two, eating more, it's the literal building blocks that go into your system and go into that muscle to build back bigger and stronger. So it allows you to build muscle better. Gives you more energy just throughout your day. I've had people be like, oh, I don't need coffee anymore. I don't have that afternoon nap. I can like run errands after work and feel good. Like it gives you energy to feel good. And it supports your hormones. So again, it's the building blocks that's going to go in to help balance and support hormones. So that all of those reasons, and the best one is when you are eating enough and eating more, you have so much more food freedom and flexibility, where it's not the constant thought of like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have that, or oh my gosh, I really want oatmeal for breakfast, but I really shouldn't have these carbs. It's almost the opposite, where you're like, no, I need this food to fuel myself. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility. So
And sorry,
go
while
ahead.
you're on that, how many weeks approximately is this phase that people
Yes.
go through where they're building up to eating enough before they go into their calorie deficit?
Yeah. So typically, I have my ladies do this over a period of about 8 weeks, about 2 months. But of course, the longer you're in this phase, the more you are in a better position to build muscle and then therefore go into a calorie deficit phase. So, for example, if you're only eating 1,400 calories right now, and then you got to go into a calorie deficit, right? That means you have to decrease from that 1,400 calories. Then you go down to 1,100, 1,000 calories per day. Like you'll be starving, hangry, you'll have lots of cravings, and then you'll beat yourself up that you don't have enough willpower to be consistent. But really,
Mm.
your body is just like, no, I cannot operate at this low of calories.
I
So
think
if
that's
you
such a good point that you made. And that's the piece I think that people don't understand is like they think they just need to eat less. And it's like, well, if you're already not eating enough, eating less, you're going to wither away and you won't exist. Like you can't
Yes.
operate.
Yeah, just from like a daily energy of getting your life done and not being miserable, um, for sure. And so I really recommend 2 months. I would say minimum. I know a lot of people are eager to decrease body fat, so I totally get that. So 8 weeks is a good point there. But at the same time, I want to emphasize that in this phase, it's not like, oh, I'm eating more, I'm going to gain body fat. If anything, I see more of the opposite, because when you do it in a slow and strategic way, meaning every other week, based on how your body's responding, you would increase 100 calories. And the macros, again, would be based off your starting point and then what your ideal targets were. And you slowly increase over time. It allows your metabolism to adjust. And when you consistently give your body more food that it needs, it's saying, hey, she's finally giving me the nutrients that I need. I can start using this. I can increase my metabolism to use this. So typically during this phase, I see ladies build muscle. I see people like tighten up, like everything looks lifted, right? Longer and leaner and lifted. I don't see ladies put on body fat because we're doing it in a very slow and strategic way. So I just had to emphasize that because I know people are thinking that.
So do most of your ladies, do you ask them to track before they even start with you? So you know exactly where they're at with calories. What if they are eating 2,000 calories a day, but it's not the right macros? Like do you keep the calories at 2,000 and then adjust their macros appropriately? Or would it then be appropriate for someone that is eating 2,000 calories before they get started, like to just go straight into a deficit?
Yeah. So I think it depends, exactly what you've said. I kind of do a review and say, okay, they're eating enough. So we're good there. But let's look at the macros. Are the macros set up to be really beneficial to get them the types of fuel that they need before we go into the deficit phase? So there's that I look at. I also look at, we're kind of getting more fine tuned, but like their daily structure. Are like, how are they optimizing nutrition around their workouts? Like, where else can we optimize, or we'd like to optimize before going into the deficit? But if someone has checked all of the box and they're already doing this, then they've already done step one, right? And then we can move into the next steps. So yeah, it's not like you have to do step one again if you're
Gotcha.
already doing it on
Yeah,
your own. Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So step two, I'll just briefly cover because it is align your training with your nutrition. So the two things that I just like to emphasize here is being on a progressive overload training program. So many want to build muscle, but they're using the same weights all year round, or they're not tracking their weights, so they don't even know if they're progressing. And that is how you build muscle. So we want to make sure you're creating that stimulus to build muscle. And then, like I mentioned before, is just considering your training with your nutrition. So let's say you have a race coming up. Let's say you're going to do a half marathon, right? We may not want to go into a calorie deficit during the final few weeks of your training in during that race if we want to focus on performance there. So we may just adjust the strategy in the timeline before that race to make sure, okay, is she fueled, right? Are we considering her performance? Are we considering her strength or muscle goals? So it's kind of considering everything there. So that's the note on step two, aligning your training with your nutrition. And then everyone's favorite, step three, entering into a calorie deficit phase. So I think the main thing to call out is when you've done step one and two, you've really primed your body to go into the calorie deficit phase and it work way more effectively. So do you want me to go into into the details? I know I can just keep going, so I'll have you ask
I
questions.
no, I let's no, I want to hear it. I mean, I
Okay.
think this I'm hanging on like the edge of my seat actually, because even though I know this, I love hearing you talk about it because you explain it so well. So yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So step 3, enter into a calorie deficit. So I'm just going to give you an example. So that way you can see maybe what I typically see with ladies who are working out and lifting. They may come to me and they're like, I'm eating enough. I'm eating 1,600 calories. And I'm like, okay, that's not bad, but let's increase that to what you're actually burning per day. And they experience all those benefits that I've talked about. Many of them, they work up to 2,000 or maybe 2,200 calories, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm never going back to the low calorie life after this calorie deficit." So you have 2 months of that, and then you go into the calorie deficit phase. Really, that is just a bigger drop in calories, anywhere from 300 to 500 calories. So let's say someone works up to 2,200 calories, then they can go into the calorie deficit phase at 1,700, which, mind you, might be more than what they were eating before. So they were eating that before, not making changes, or they were eating, let's say, that 1,600 calories before, not making changes. And now they work their way up to 2,200, they decrease to 1,700, and now they're decreasing body fat at 1,700. But they still have enough food to fuel the workouts. They still have enough food to be not feel hangry and not have cravings. And it just puts them in a really good position. So,
And sorry,
okay.
I just want to really quick before you move on. They start their calorie deficit at 1,700, or they're going from 2,200 to 1,700, or over the course of how long?
Good question. So it's just one quick drop. So you want to think of it as, on the way up, we want your metabolism to adapt, right? So we're going slow. We want your metabolism to adapt. But then in the calorie deficit phase, we do one big drop because we don't want your metabolism to adapt. We still want it burning at that 2,200, and we want it to say, oh, hey, we're only going to give you 1,700 though. You've got to find the rest of that fuel. And we want you to find it from body fat. So we want you to pull the rest of that fuel from body fat. So it's a kind of a way to manipulate the body but using our natural systems to be able to have our body decrease body fat. So no, it's just one big drop. And then of course, there may be some tweaks along the way, or down the road, after a while, which we'll get into. But typically to start with, one big drop. And I say big, 300 to 500 calories. And of course that would break down into macros. So typically that's going to be a decrease from fats, and maybe some from carbs too.
So, what is an example of a good amount of weight loss to expect every week in a calorie deficit?
Yeah. So first, two things that I want to mention is, how long is the calorie deficit phase? Because it doesn't end there. So the calorie deficit phase for females, I would suggest anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. And you get in, you get the job done, and then you get out. You do not stay in a calorie deficit phase forever. You then repeat the strategy. So you go back then to step 1 after those 8 to 12 weeks, to step 1 of eating enough, where you slowly and steadily increase your intake up. A lot of people know it as the reverse diet. So it's really important that you just don't stay there, because then if you stay at that 1,700 calories, right, then you're just putting yourself in that same position you were in before of not eating enough, where you don't have the fuel, you don't have the leverage to decrease body fat, and you may have plateaued, you don't have as much energy, all of that. So we can get into what that looks like after, but I just wanted to share that part of it. So that's how long the calorie deficit phase would be. And then as far as expectations, again, for females who have less than 40 pounds to lose, maybe you're just focused on, body composition changes 5 pounds to up to 40, about a third of a pound to a pound per week. The less body fat you have to lose, that might be a little smaller. That could even be a half a pound if you're already fairly lean. But I'd like to see typically half a pound to a pound per week. And again, I think people think, oh my gosh, the faster I lose, the better. But that's not the case, because if you are losing too quickly, meaning your calories are too low, then your body's going to say, okay, I got to pull that fuel from somewhere. And if they can't get to fat quick enough, they may pull some from fat. They're going to say, what's a better source that I can quickly pull from to get me quicker energy? And you could potentially be pulling from your muscle, because your body will go in and say, okay, I'm going to break down this protein to be used as fuel. So I think it's just want to call out that it's not a race to just drop as quickly as you can. You want to be strategic with that too.
I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I'm having multiple conversations right now with friends that are coming to me about their macros, and they're like, I am not, I used to be able to like drop 5 pounds in a week. And well, I'm like, there are so many different circumstances that change in our bodies over time with like age, activity level, hormones, right? Like there's so much that goes into it. So I'm really glad that you're calling out that it is a absolutely normal pace to lose a half a pound a week. That's perfectly healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, back in the day, we've all done some diet where you lose a lot more than that in a week, but you could just be losing from muscle, right? And, a decent amount from muscle. So at the end of the day, it's like, oh, sure, the scale's going down, but are you actually improving your physique? No.
Hmm.
So that's something to consider. And then, especially when we're going to talk about too scale fluctuations and water weight and that changes those changes too. But I think the main point is I have ladies who are like, okay, I'm in the calorie deficit phase. My targets are 1,700 calories, but what happens if I just eat less than that? What if, is it okay if I just eat less than that? And I'm like, well, no, you still want to hit your targets, because there's a strategy here and it's intentional. And the goal isn't to just drop as quickly as we can. We want to be strategic about it.
And how would you explain the fat loss process when people are not experiencing a downward trend on the scale? What happens when the scale fluctuates or they plateau? What is going on in the body?
Yes, such a good question, because this happens. I wouldn't say to everyone, but it's the art and the science. So, for example, I'm in a calorie deficit phase right now. I just started, so I'm 3 weeks in, and this week I haven't seen any movement. So I think a lot on the scale, right? I haven't seen any movement on the scale. So I think that this is where a lot of people would be like, "Oh my gosh, it's not working anymore. I plateaued. Do I change things? Do I not? Do I like what's not working? What am I doing wrong?" And so, because I have the knowledge behind it, right? That I know that you want to wait a week, right, to assess your trends. This is why I think daily weigh-ins are important during this time frame, because the scale's going to change every single day based on so many factors. If you get less sleep, the scale will be up. If you're higher stress, the scale will be up. If you're dehydrated, the scale will be down. If you have inflammatory foods from eating out, even if it's a healthier restaurant, typically they're still going to use inflammatory
Mhm.
oils, and then the scale is going to be up the next day. All of that's going to be temporary weight changes from water retention and inflammation. Perfect example is if you train hard, if you go to the gym and you work out really hard and you are building muscle, your muscle is going to go through the process of, for lack of a better term, breaking down and building back stronger. That's going to cause inflammation at that site of the muscle, which inflammation is going to show up as weight on the scale. So you might be like, wait a minute, I worked out so hard yesterday. Why is the scale up today? And that
Yeah.
actually could be a good thing, because you're doing what you want to, building muscle.
I just experienced that where I could feel it's really crazy when you start this journey of becoming really aware of like the data you're collecting from the scale and the way that you feel from eating certain foods, because I knew like going to bed after a workout, I was like, I feel shot. Like I could feel swollen already before I even went to bed. And I was like, I'm expecting the scale actually to go up tomorrow. And sure enough, I was up 0.9 pounds. Like it was so clear, but I didn't panic. I was like, this is, and I could feel it the next day. I was like, I just feel like my central nervous system is a little bit hit. I feel kind of swollen. Like this is a rest day. I don't wear an aura ring, but if I did, I think it would tell me. Aisha, sit the F down. It would be like, you are doing zero movement today.
Yes.
But it was really cool that I could just I could listen to my body and understand what was going on, like on the scale, and not freak out. Because I think stepping on the scale every day could cause some issues for people that are used to what weight loss should look like, right? Like they get really fixed on a number. And I think it's what I've heard you mention before that I think is so helpful. I want to reiterate is that through this process of priming your body and then deficit and then reverse dieting is that all of it is collecting data. Just detach yourself from what it is
Yes.
going to mean in terms of what you look like or what the scale says, and just see it for like numbers. All it is like numbers, right? You don't need to become obsessed about it. They're there to tell you information about your body. It doesn't need to, it has nothing to do with your worth or how beautiful you are. It's literally just a number. So that's something that I want to just say for people that like might go into weighing themselves every day is like detach yourself from the day to day and look at the whole like 12-week process then and be like, wow, even though I saw some fluctuations up and down, if I zoom out, I'm looking at a downward trend overall.
For those who embrace the impossible, the Defender 110 is up for the adventure. This iconic vehicle has been redefined with thoroughly modern design, both on the interior and exterior, with integrity and robust materials. With added innovations like the intuitive driver display, an award-winning infotainment system, and extra cargo capacity for your gear, the Defender 110 lets you go further and do more. Whether you're a family of two or have added to your gang, your adventures await. The Defender family features the two-door Defender 90, the Defender 110, and the Defender 130, which seats up to 8. Learn more at landroverusa.com/Defender. You may know Cozy Earth from being on Oprah's favorite things list, but have you tried it for yourself? If you're into all things comfy, then you have to check out Cozy Earth. I love their bed sheets, but they also make women's loungewear that is crafted from breathable and luxurious materials so you feel comfortable and look cute no matter if you're at work, running errands, or in the comfort of your own home. I'm also in love with the waffle texture robe. It's like a hotel experience, but at home. Cozy Earth provided an exclusive offer for my listeners today. You can get 35% off site-wide when you use the code MindsetMile at CozyEarth.com. Something I learned recently that blew my mind is that the indoor air we breathe is 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. And in some cases, up to 100 times more polluted, according to the EPA. And air pollution is responsible for nearly 7 million premature deaths globally. We've personally been using an air purifier in our home for a few years, but I haven't appreciated how much work it was doing until now. The Air Doctor is an air purifier that filters out 99.99% of dangerous contaminants so that your lungs don't have to. This includes pollutants such as allergens, pollen, pet dander, dust mite, mold spores, and even bacteria and viruses that make you sick. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day breathe easy money back guarantee. So if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus the shipping. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code MindsetMile to receive up to $300 off air purifiers. And exclusive to podcast customers, you will also receive a free 3-year warranty on any unit, which is an additional $84 value. Go get your Air Doctor purifier today at Air Doctor Pro. That's AIRDOCTORPRO.com and use code MindsetMile.
Yes, this is such a good point because we are never taught this, right? We are only taught if the scale's down, good. If it's up, bad. And so, of course, we're going to have this negative reaction to the scale, and it may make us feel defeated all day or become obsessed with it and all of that. And so this is why I emphasize so much on learning and teaching and the science behind it, because that's how you really become in tune with your body, when you realize that it's science and it's math and science and you can make sense of it. So I loved your example because at first you probably would get on the scale and have that negative reaction. Then you learn a little bit more and you get on the scale and you're like, wait a minute. And this is what I teach with my ladies. It's like, wait a minute, what happened in the past 24 to 48 hours that would influence the scale? And not just think about the scale, think about my body, right? What would cause my body to hold on to water or inflammation or vice versa, right? So that's kind of the next progression. And then after that, I can already see that you're going a step further, where even before you step on the scale, you know, in your body, you're like, wait a minute, had a hard workout. I can feel swollen and inflamed from that. The scale's going to be up, right? And when you get to that point, you are so in tune with your body and you have so much knowledge to know what's going on that it's a completely different experience, because it's coming from information, knowledge, and control, and kind of in tune with your machine, right? Your body, versus guilt and what's going on in confusion and all of that. So I think that's a fantastic point, because I see that time and time again with my ladies, how much the relationship improves with their body when they understand the science behind it.
Yeah, I think it's so empowering. I love it. I'm obsessed with everything. I feel like everyone needs to do this.
Totally. And
It's just
especially
so
as
good.
females, because
Yeah.
we have cycles, right? We
Hmm.
have menstrual cycles. And that in itself, as estrogen changes throughout our cycles, estrogen is known to hold on to more water. So whether it's in your lower belly or just all over your body at certain times during your cycle, you might physically feel that, but that may also show up on the scale. And again, I think it's important to call out that these are temporary water retention and inflammation changes, versus that is going to be different than decreasing body fat. So in the background, you still may be decreasing body fat, and technically, if you removed everything else, if we could just look at body fat per day, that may still be going down. But if it's offset by this water retention from your cycle or from eating out or something like that, the scale isn't going to reflect that. So you're going to feel really confused and upset, and it's not working. But it it may be still working. It's just being offset by some of these factors.
So good. So good. Okay, so we started talking about reverse dieting. So after a cut, explain the reverse diet. How does that work?
So after the calorie deficit phase, like I mentioned, you don't stay in there forever. Just want to emphasize that. You get in, you get the job done, and you get out after 8 to 12 weeks. So from there, you kind of just repeat the nutrition strategy, because you're at that starting point again where you may be at 1400, 1600, 1700 calories. And you want to, again, step one, eat enough. So it's going to look like a 100-calorie increase, maybe over every week, every other week. Typically, I find that once my ladies go through the strategy once, their body is already used to getting more food, and so they can more quickly increase their food the next time. And after they experience the benefits of eating enough and they're not afraid of carbs anymore, all of that, they're like ready to eat more. So I find that once you go through it once, you can build up quicker. But yeah, then you'll build up to that, what you're burning per day, whether it's 2,000 calories or 2,200 calories. So that's the reverse diet explained. But I know people have questions.
Yes. And I think one of those questions, the elephant in the room, is how does it work for you to be consuming upwards of 400 to 500 more calories in a reverse diet and or maintenance phase while not adding weight or body fat back?
Yeah, good question. So kind of think of your body and think of the extra fat as like a savings account, right? So when you go into that calorie deficit, you're pulling from the savings account, right? But then when you reverse back up, you're getting more money, but your metabolism is also increasing, right, to adjust for how much money that you are getting. So again, this is when you do it in a slow and steady way. And so you're getting that money and you're spending it. You're not putting it back into your savings account, or AKA you're not putting back you need 120 grams of protein per day. Well, if you know that you're eating 4 times a day, you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then your snack, you're getting your post-workout protein shake in, right? Then you know, without even tracking, without even looking at an app, without even looking at a food scale, that each meal needs to have about the size of your hand on your plate. So even without tracking, you could still be pretty close to hitting your macros, right? So I feel like during the eating enough time, the step one, this is a really good time to practice that and to learn that. But really with the goal of after the calorie deficit phase, right? With the calorie deficit phase, you do have to be more precise and more accurate. But after the calorie deficit phase is to go back into that eating enough time frame or step one, where I really consider like that's the lifestyle part. That's where you have more flexibility and to utilize these hand estimates, which you can do a similar approach with carbs and fat, to go out in the world, go out to dinner, go out for lunch, go to your friend's baby shower, and enjoy yourself and just know food versus wait, what is the app? Tell me.
Oh, I just blew it one day. Like they just know that they went like way over. What is one day or even a couple days of just going like off? What does that do?
Yeah. So first I always question, I'm like, let's actually quantify that. Because it probably feels really bad and you feel off and you feel guilty, but what actually happened? Like let's your emotions are definitely. And it's like, oh, actually, if we do the math, right? 200 calories divided by 3,500. I don't know what math that is. That's probably 5%. So I'm like, oh, okay, you maybe didn't lose 0.005 pounds from that. So it's like, oh, wait a minute. That really does not matter. And it's really okay. So, again, quantifying it, but to summarize it, if you're not as much of a math person, is to be like, oh, yeah, I could have, my perfect example, one of my clients was like, oh, my kid's birthday, we're actually doing a whole weekend event for it. I've got the favorite cake. It's my favorite cake too. And I'm like, great, what do you want to do? And she's like, I'd really like to enjoy it. And I'm like, okay, let's enjoy it. And just decide for 3 days you're not going to make progress. And for 3 days, if the typically over a week, again, if you lose 1 pound per week in 3 days, that might be point, 2 pounds, 0.3 pounds. And she's like, you know what? If I just lose that 0.3 pounds next weekend instead of this weekend, I'm okay with that. I'm like, yes, totally. That's it quantifying it and being like, wait a minute, if I just reach my goal a week later than I originally planned, that won't be the end of the world. I could actually do
Great.
that, and it's not a
That works for me.
problem.
You literally get to have your cake and eat it too.
Yes, exactly. And there was one more thing too, that I want to touch on, going back to the kind of intuitive eating, if we still have time.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I know we talked about estimating macros, but if I had to say, to share with someone, like, okay, if you're not tracking macros, what are you doing? Right? Not like
Mhm.
it as in like you should be tracking macros, but like, do you know what to do? And I think
Mhm.
everyone should. I think they should have that down first and then just use macros to fine tune. And
Mhm.
then they can use those foundational tools to still be pretty directional with macros, even if they're not, I put in quotes, Thank you so much for having me. I know we could talk about this for hours, so I enjoy these conversations. And I hope everyone learned a lot, and happy macro tracking.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jenny. And I can't wait to see you next week, friend. Until then, make it a great day.